God bless you today. Praise the Lord. We're going to read Acts chapter 12, 11 to 19. Seeing a miracle. And it says, And when Peter was come to himself, he said, Now I know of a surety that the Lord hath sent his angel, and hath delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. And when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a damsel came to hearken, named Rhoda. And when she knew Peter's voice, she opened not the gate for gladness, but ran in and told how Peter stood before the gate. And they said unto her, Thou art mad. But she constantly affirmed that it was so, even so. Then said they, It is his angel. But Peter continued knocking, and when they had opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. But he, beckoning unto them with the hand to hold their peace, declared unto them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, Go show these things unto James and to the brethren. And he departed and went into another place. Now as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers what was become of Peter. And when Herod had sought for him, and found him not, he examined the keepers and commanded that they should be put to death. And he went down from Judea to Caesarea and there abode. Again, reading verse number 11, it says, And when Peter was come to himself, he said, Now I know of a surety that the Lord hath sent his angel, and hath delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. So again, we're titling this Seeing a Miracle. Peter in this verse had just realized that it was not a vision, but it was actually reality. For it states Peter was come to himself. He had known what a vision was and how it had felt. He might have felt that in the supernatural it seems like a person is there, but he's really not there. Thus, with this past vision of the sheet coming down of heaven, with the unclean in the Old Testament animals, God telling him to rise and eat, he must have felt it so real, yet he was not there. Therefore, when Peter had been led out of prison, it might have been that type of experience, for he had felt the supernatural taking place. But when he had come to himself, that just meant because he had seen those things, it did not mean that he was out, but he thought that he might have had some figurative meaning like that vision of those animals coming down out of heaven. Therefore, Peter's experience with the supernatural was an experience that could have been really happening or that of a vision only. But both experiences to him felt very real and as if the person is right there, present. Thus, when he had come to himself, the good news was that he was definitely freed from the prison. If it were a vision, he might have thought that he would still be in prison, but God would work out the circumstances for him to be freed. However, God did this to bring the supernatural into the world of the natural, at least for Peter himself. For therefore, Peter must have felt the powers of the supernatural just like he had experienced the vision. But this one was happening in real time with the feelings of the supernatural present, but he was actually walking and being freed in the natural. Thus, the two groups of enemies he had mentioned, the Jews that were keen on killing him, for being a Christian and a Christian leader, and Herod, who could, at a whim, try and kill him, but he was freed. So they knew not where he should be, or he would be. The reader understands what the expectations of of the Jews were. And that was for Peter to be killed, thinking, just like when Jesus was crucified, they had thought that his message and his name would disappear. However, this time God did not allow Herod to kill Peter like he had done to James. The prayers of the church were answered so that Peter could walk freely. But he and others were probably in more of a hiding moment to keep themselves from getting martyred or murdered by the Jews, the Sanhedrin, or even Herod. And it might just have been that moment of the threat of Herod going after Peter that even Luke might not have openly commented about what was transpiring with him, or Luke himself and others may not have known so much about his whereabouts and the things God was doing through him in order to keep it from the rulers of the Jews, so that Herod would not be able to kill him. For even Jesus himself sometimes avoided certain places due to the threat of him being killed, quote unquote, before his time. In verse number 12 it says, "And when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying." Peter, of course, had to decide in which direction and to whose house he needed to go to. It seems like that he went to the right place, but only for a particular time period. We don't know exactly how long, but probably before the sun came up. So he had gone directly to John Mark's mother's house. That must give us an indication that he had known them quite well for that to happen, and that, of course, they were Christians. He might not have known that they had been praying for him, but he probably was told about it, or he could hear them praying. But he might have been told anyway that they had been praying for him, and that they might have, even right then, told him that James had been martyred by Herod before the festival. Mark was the one who had gone on a missionary journey with Barnabas and Saul, and he was quite young at the time. Peter and even Mark might have had a close relationship, for some have said that the book of Mark was actually the stories that Peter had shared with Mark for him to write them. One of the questions in the mind of the reader is, did Peter know about James's martyrdom at the time that it happened, or does someone else have to tell him? When was it that Peter had found out about it? That is a question. Since Peter had been sleeping soundly that night between two guards, he may not have known anything that James had gone through, a murder, his own martyrdom, because he seems to be comfortably sleeping in the prison. Yet, that's only conjecture. Sure, he could have fallen asleep, but you would think that he would have been a little upset. In verse number 13 it says, "And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a damsel came to hearken, named Rhoda." The hour in the which Peter had knocked at the door of the gate must have been extremely late. Yet the people were still in the house, and they were still keen on uh, opening the door of the gate, or going out there to see who it was. They might have thought before opening the door, or this is the case, that it was Rhoda who had gone out there, that maybe another Christian had come to pray with them at the house upon hearing of it. Yet when Rhoda had come to the door of the gate, um, she had not opened that door because she was very shocked. But we can say that she was also glad for Peter's release, for she had known that Peter had been taken to prison and had been locked up. Rhoda also, much like Mark at that time, was very young, or just as a damsel is defined, a single lady, which probably meant, of course, that she was young. Rhoda might have been of the family of Mark too, as Mark's sister. Yet, we know that she was unmarried. Eliot's commentary mentions that female servants were those in charge of opening the doors. Certainly, there is no assurance that she was a servant of the household, but there was an assurance that she was a Christian and one who had known who Peter was. Could have been that she was just Mary's daughter. However, when Peter knocked at the door of the gate, the others might have told her to see who it was and to let them know first before opening. So that was why she just ran and told them. Or it could have been her own joy, which it sounds like from the text, that she wanted to declare that to the others before Peter was able to, and Peter before them seeing Peter in face to face. There's Rhoda, and giving this name by her Jewish family, who declared Vincent's Vincent Word's studies, had given names to their female children, such as the names of flowers. And Rhoda, for Rhoda, that name means rose. One must remember that the word says that Peter had knocked at the door of the gate and not the door of the house. Therefore, the house must have been quite a big one, for those that have gates are usually, or generally, we can say, larger than those that do not. And at that particular house, there must have been enough room, of course, for there to be a large number of Christians dedicating themselves to prayer for Peter and his bondage. And they maybe had chosen that place because it was larger. Furthermore, it could have been that Peter had seen Rhoda come to the door of the gate. I'm sure after a while that, yes, he probably did. Rhoda was able to make out that fact, even in the dark, that it was definitely Peter, but not precisely by his image. Because it was dark, it doesn't say that she understood by looking at him, but rather from his voice. So one gets a picture of a gate a little further out from the house and the fence or wall that was encompassing the entire yard. In verse number 14, it says, "And when she knew Peter's voice, she opened not the gate for gladness, but ran in and told how Peter stood before the gate." So, in other words, she was glad. It sounds like she was glad, but she did not open the gate yet. She just wanted to go tell the news. This provides to us the location of where Peter was knocking and also standing still while Rhoda is going back into the house. Rhoda had already seen Peter, or at least knew that it was Peter. And so there is a difference between knowing him in his image because it was very dark at night, it was still nighttime, and knowing his voice. And the Bible does say that she knew Peter's voice, so that was his voice and not his image that she recognized, at least from the text. It may be that she did not or could not make out who was at the gate until Peter had actually verified who he was or had called for them. In verse number 13, it only states that Peter had knocked at the gate. But here in verse 14, Peter was not only knocking, but he must have been saying something or calling. Maybe he even called her name. Who knows? It could have been that Peter might have thought that they would not open for such a late period of time, so that is why he said something. But it could have been also Rhoda asking who it was when she came to the gate. And so, with the spreading of Christianity, also, a lot of their activities could have been done at night because the authorities had been persecuting the Christians. When Rhoda had heard Peter's voice, it states that she had known right away that it was Peter's voice. She wanted to tell the others to have them know that it was he at the gate. And how in the world did he get there? It seems that there must have been a door to the house and a door to the gate. Here in this story, it mentioned that Peter had been knocking at the gate, or the door of the gate, not at the door of the house. Further, it states that Rhoda had not opened the gate for gladness, meaning that she must have gone outside of the house to the gate, and there she might have been able to recognize Peter, but more assurance is placed upon the fact that it was his voice that she understood and recognized. And so she might have been asking who it was, and Peter had said that it was he. And when she heard it, she knew the voice. So then she immediately ran in. The quote unquote ran in, that is in verse number 14, but ran in, indicates that she had gone back into the house where they were praying to tell them. And they were interrupted of their prayers. But she had told them that Peter had stood before the gate. In verse number 15, it says, "And they said unto her, Thou art mad. But she constantly affirmed that it was even so. Then said they, It is his angel." When Rhoda had come into the house again, but did not open the gate just yet, for she was probably shocked and did not know what to do, or just overjoyed to see him and know that he was there. When she had told the others that it was Peter on the outside of the gate, and affirming that it was truly him, of course they said she was mad. In other words, she was going crazy. And that is quite a statement because they were all praying. That just means that they were just as shocked as she was. But they were getting an answer to their prayer, so why would they be shocked, right? But it was something totally different and out of the ordinary, and God does those things. They thought a little bit about it, and then they had said it must have been his angel. Why would they say that? It must be that they could have had the thought that the angel of a particular person might just look like that person, and that this quote unquote angel's appearance might bring good news, or just appearing there would be a way to provide an answer to their prayer about Peter. However, it was not an angel. It was truly Peter himself knocking at the door of the gate. The angel had already opened the door of the prison. They just needed to open the door to their home to find that their prayers really had truly been answered. In verse number 16, it says, "But Peter continued knocking, and when they had opened the door and saw him, they were astonished." So this time, of course, it refers to they rather than just her. They had opened the door and saw him. They were astonished. So we can say that Rhoda, at the beginning, it was just her that had come to the gate. But later, at this particular point, when she had come back out of the house, she was not alone, for it states they had opened the door. And that must mean the door of the gate, because the door of the gate still had not been opened yet. He was still on the outside of the gate. Thus, Rhoda had others with her to have the door of the gate opened, and it was like her saying, "You see?" And they were all witnesses again to the miraculous power of God. There standing before them was a miracle of God. And so they were astonished at seeing that miracle, but they should have been saying, "Glory to God, I believe it, and I know that God does miracles." So Peter standing before them at that hour of the night was miraculous. Peter must have known that people were at the house. He may have been able to hear their prayers from outside. In any case, he was finally allowed entrance after their initial shock, and um, not opening the door of the gate just as of yet. But he must have felt that it was not beneficial also for him to remain there, because it says that he went out into another place. And maybe it was because he was worried that that might have been a house targeted, or at least the authorities might have thought that he was or could have been there. Verse 17, but he, beckoning unto them with a hand to hold their peace, declared unto them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, go show these things unto James and to the brethren. And he departed and went into another place. Their astonishment, of course, turned into great joy and gladness. They were continuing to question him, I suppose, of how it was that he was able to escape from the prison. But actually, in truth, it was not him doing the escape, it was God who sent an angel to help him escape. It was all God's doing, and not at all his own, Peter's own, nor was it the people's own way of getting him to come out. It was God answering their prayer. It was due to their prayers, yes, and God answered. Peter then had declared unto them how that the Lord had brought him out of the prison. Further, Peter had said unto them that they should talk to the brethren, that is, more specifically to James, who, of course, must have been the Lord's brother, unless he knew not that James, the brother of John, had been martyred. But they probably would have told him then and there had he mentioned it that way, and the text would have mentioned it too. He must have been then referring to James, the younger brother of Jesus. In verse number 18, it says, now as soon as it was day, there was no small stir among the soldiers what was become of Peter. In other words, Herod is quite angry. So angry, he wants to know exactly what had happened. Luke, the writer, changes from where Peter had gone, not even writing in the exact indication of where he had gone, kind of like to hide that indication. One wonders if the authorities if they had found Luke's writing, then they could have investigated it further. There may have been things not mentioned in his writing because he wished to keep them from the authorities too, if for in any case they were able to see or read where he was at a particular time. And so, keeping him, that is Peter, safe from prying eyes of the authorities, and the safe due to this, for the safety of the Christians, especially the leaders, he might have kept um, the writing of those apostles within the city of Jerusalem and out inside of Israel more like a secret. However, outside of Israel, that's where he began focusing on. The soldiers were clearly unaware of how Peter had gotten free. All of them had nothing to do with it. They were just as shocked. However, they were not shocked for joy. They were shocked in the negative way because it meant they don't know where he is and they are responsible, and it is going to be their life for his freedom. So they were probably astonished, but much more so in the fear factor, giving them a fear factor. And so, even though that they had not known how Peter had gotten free, they had no explanation, but Herod would not accept any excuse, even though Herod possibly could not find out either how in the world Peter had escaped. The day had come that was the day, unfortunately, for those soldiers, that they would no longer be living, for Herod would require Peter's freedom at their hand. So they were to be murdered by Herod for it. Instead of murdering Peter, the soldiers are murdered. Clearly, in any investigation, they would never have found out how he was able to escape, for none of them had anything to do with the escape, and there was no evidence of how he escaped. It was all supernatural. But, of course, they were not able to come to that conclusion because they probably did not believe in those kind of supernatural occurrences, even though that the Bible was full of it. Verse number 19, it says, And when Herod had sought for him and found him not, he examined the keepers and commanded that they should be put to death. Herod himself had heard that Peter was no longer there in the prison, since Herod was so determined to kill Peter, for he wanted the praise of the Jews. That is the basic point. He was looking for praise from the Jews so that he would hear it. And if he did not kill Peter, then he wouldn't have that kind of praise. And furthermore, if he didn't kill him, and if he didn't kill the soldiers, maybe he thought that then he would be humiliated because he couldn't find who had done it and how he had done it. Just killing them, he could possibly make up a story of how it transpired, but that, of course, was not going to be the Christian story. The Christian story is written in the Bible, and that story is the truth. He might have thought that they were trying to pull some trick upon him, but they were just as innocent as anyone else for that matter. And Herod, not omniscient, he still had thought that the soldiers were guilty, or at least he had killed them because that's um, the idea that he had. If he could not obviously find any evidence that they were guilty, but still they were going to kill. Herod was going to kill them just for the fact that he could not find the prisoner, and they also could not find the prisoner. And so had become guilty parties. For Peter was on the, we can say, death row. He was going to be slain. And if he was not around, if someone, um, Herod probably thought that someone was uh, guilty of allowing this person to leave. So all of the soldiers would take Peter's place and get death, the death sentence, unfortunately. In Herod's examination, it must have been true that he had found nothing of this sort to convict the Roman soldiers of neglect in their duty. However, he did not want humiliation and he wanted praise. He definitely wanted to kill Peter to please the Jews, but he couldn't do it. So he was fighting against a great wall because God wouldn't allow him to do it. Herod had commanded that the soldiers be put to death instead of Peter because Peter was not put to death and he had escaped somehow. We can say then that Herod put to death innocent soldiers. For Herod, it was not necessary per se that he needed any evidence of a person's innocence, for he could not find any evidence to the contrary. Even though that they were innocent, Herod did not know that. He just wanted to make sure that he did not look like an idiot or a person someone can deceive. Thus, even if he believed that they were all innocent, it was as if he needed to make sure that they had died to save the king's face, so that he not suffer humiliation in front of anyone or any crowd. For as soon as the others would find out about it, they might begin saying something negative about Herod's soldiers or Herod himself. To stop their gossip, it was much easier to find someone else guilty and make the innocent pay for the freedom of Peter. And it says, and he went down from Judea to Caesarea, and there abode. This refers to the trip that Herod had made to Caesarea for the purpose of meeting with certain ones of Tyre and Sidon. Herod was quite angry at them in his mind, and it might have been, had they not been so conciliatory, he might have waged war. He expected more of those cities too, I assume, given to give unto him, yet they, in that speech, they treated him well. It can be assumed, but not up to the expectations of Herod before he had come there. Herod wanted things to be better from them. Herod expected them to work harder or to provide for certain things that Herod had expectations for. And so he was quite angry and possibly would have been seeking some trouble with them. In any case, that is Acts chapter 12, 11 to 19. May God bless you today in the name of Jesus. Amen.